So I'm just gonna say it. I knew she wasn't going to win. And I don't mean this in an I told you so way, nor do I say this with any pleasure. Rather, realistically, I just didn't see it ever happening. Hillary couldn't win against Trump in 2016. Why would Harris, a lesser known politician to many compared to Clinton, who isn't just a woman but also a person of color, beat Trump? It didn't work in 2016. Why would it work now? In fact, 2016 was an even closer election than this one. Hillary won the popular vote by 3 million votes, 65 million to Trump's 62 million. But she lost in the Electoral College with 232 versus 306. Kamala, on the other hand, only had 66 million popular votes, with Trump winning over 70 million votes at the time I'm writing this video, as all the votes haven't been counted yet. Trump is currently doing less in the Electoral College than in 2016, but Harris still only has 226 votes compared to Trump's 295, much less than Hillary's 232 votes. Yet again, all of the votes haven't come in yet. A woman of color will never beat Trump because the US is too sexist and racist to ever let that happen. This whole election, I just kept replaying that SNL sketch from 2016 after Hillary lost in my head, where the white liberal voters are so sure Hillary will win, but minorities in the room know what's up. But I didn't want to be a naysayer. A lot of people around me had hope for change, and even I had hope that Kamala's undoubted charisma and infectious laugh and even celebrity endorsements would help pull her through this, despite not listening to young people and her voter base. But there was just no way. So in this video, I want to delve into why I thought Harris was going to lose this election, the failures of the Democratic Party when it came to her campaign, as well as look at voter profiles and voter turnout to help ourselves understand the extent some Americans and the Republican Party will go to say no to progress and where we can go from here. So without further ado, let's go. Before I start, I want to make it clear that the only people to really blame on Trump winning are those who voted for him after knowing all of the horrible things he and his cohorts have done and said. It's deeply troubling, to say the least, that more than 72 million people turned up to support him, either because they agree with him and are just racist and sexist, are loyal to the party as a joke, or are doing it to spite Harris and the Dems. It doesn't matter, they still voted for violence, hate, and bigotry. However, it would also be remiss to not discuss the Democratic Party's shortcomings this election, and why their voter base wasn't going all in on Harris, with even some abstaining from voting despite Trump also being on the ticket. So before we get into 2024, let's look at 2020. From my standpoint, one of the only reasons Biden won in 2020 was because he's an old white man that people who don't closely follow politics were vaguely familiar with. It also helped that people could vote by mail in 2020 due to COVID, which led to the highest voter turnout in the 21st century, with 66.8% of citizens 18 years and older voting in the election. Not to mention that he was running on a platform of eliminating student loan debt targeting young voters, which Harris only addressed in the last weeks of October. In addition, we just had 4 years of Donald Trump when we thought in 2016 that was never going to happen. So a lot of people just wanted him to get the fuck out. Do I think Biden would have beat Trump in 2024? I guess we'll never know, but honestly, probably not, due to the fact that people don't even like him now. For me, Biden has turned into the lamest duck president who only cares about furthering a never-ending war and eating ice cream. He's become the perfect encapsulation of what it means to be a centrist liberal who just wants to stick with the status quo. Firstly, he didn't go after Trump after the 2021 coup. Secondly, after Roe vs. Wade was overturned, he then had the audacity to run on a campaign that said he would change the ruling if you re-elected him with the Democratic Congress. That's comforting. And he said this while in office. And lastly, his health and cognitive abilities have been declining for the past 2 years, but he refused to step down as the Democratic nominee until the end of July, giving Harris only 3 months to campaign before November. Again, maybe he could have beaten Trump, but I personally doubt anyone would be more motivated to vote for him, even being an old white guy, especially with Trump's smear campaign against him, which started in June and only got worse after the debate later that month. At least with Harris, he didn't have the emails to talk about like he did with Hillary, or age like he did with Biden, which certainly would have turned even more people against Biden, or at least make the Democratic Party look even worse in comparison to first-time voters. But to give Biden some slack, he alone doesn't have the executive power to stop the right and their rulings, like Roe vs. Wade was in the hands of the Supreme Court. As the president, he doesn't have all the power. The president isn't a dictator. There's checks and balances. At the same time, he could have, for example, verbally condemned Israel and cut off their funding as commander-in-chief, like many other presidents around the world have done, and not have the audacity to run his re-election campaign on vote for me to get your reproductive rights back while he again was still in office. I know he needs a blue Congress to get things done, but come on, can you not dangle our rights in front of us like that? This isn't to say that Biden hasn't done anything. With student loans, for example, according to the White House website, before President Biden took office, only 7,000 people ever received debt relief through the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Plan. After fixing the program, the Biden-Harris administration has now canceled student loan debt for nearly 800,000 public service workers. So that's really important. It's not like him and his administration just twiddled their thumbs for 4 years. Another example of work that Democrats have been doing the past 4 years was trying to pass the Build Back Better Act, or BBB Act, which would provide more COVID relief and include an American jobs plan to invest in infrastructure projects across the country, as well as provide free preschool for kids ages 3 to 4 so parents could go back to work. The bill passed in the House, but unfortunately key Democratic players like Democratic Senator from West Virginia Joe Manchin didn't back the bill in the Senate, and instead it turned into the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, which lessened the scope of the original BBB framework that Biden had laid out. It doesn't help that one of the only Democrats to have an in with Republicans in the Senate calls himself a moderate centrist and is also a businessman who owns a coal brokerage company called EnerSystems. So Biden tried, but it's not all up to him. At the same time, he is still responsible for holding up the 2024 election and not changing his unpopular stances on core issues. He wanted to continue the genocide in Gaza and didn't seem too upset that one of the biggest acts that could change millions of lives wasn't moving forward. As a typical moderate liberal, Biden probably felt resigned to the bill's fate. That's how politics is. We don't play dirty like Republicans. We're better than that. We compromise and move forward, which I guess is nice in theory, but in practice, no, that's not how the world works. Instead, Biden and later Harris's presidential campaign turned into an anyone but Trump party, rather than about the issues at hand. Bernie even endorsed Biden in a piece in the New York Times, like, let's just forget about Biden's politics to make sure Trump doesn't win. Most of Kamala's presidential ads were about how horrible Trump is and that he's a convicted felon running for office, when don't worry, we know all of that. But I get it, vote blue no matter who, especially with Trump on the ticket, but this election showed me at least, and honestly the 2016 election showed me as well, that you cannot run on a platform solely about stopping Donald Trump. You cannot focus all your energy on just trying to own him in debates, showing that he's a crook in your ads, calling him and his fans and friends weird losers. It doesn't work. He's called Teflon Don for a reason. Nothing sticks to him. So just stop centering him and furthering his legitimacy, and instead maybe push more left and listen to young people who feel alienated by the only progressive party with a chance of winning in this godforsaken country. Don't let the conservatives control the conversation. When they go right, we go left. They already see you as a communist and socialist, might as well go all in. Anti-war sentiment is very high right now. Students want peace, not to be sprayed with tear gas or to be told, I'm speaking, or to be totally ignored at the DNC or worse, mocked. Pro-Palestinian politicians and constituents held a vigil outside of the DNC because they weren't allowed inside. That's how bad it was. The I'm speaking thing was repackaged as a girl boss move by the Democrats, but it was really just a big fuck you to the voters who want U.S. imperialism to be addressed and ended. Left-leaning millennials and zoomers like myself want universal student loan forgiveness back on the table. We want a concrete plan about affordable housing and public transportation projects, gun control, and climate change. And plans for a better, more progressive future exist. I mean, the BBB framework is all there. Why not talk about that? I barely even knew about this bill until I started doing more research, but this should be at the forefront of their campaign. But all we got was more war and the most lethal fighting force in the world. I'm not saying Harris is a horrible, evil person comparable to Trump, but the campaign wasn't what it should have been. They thought they could pander to Gen Z by making Kamala a brat, when what Gen Z really cares about is global consciousness, and being able to envision a future they can afford and not work until they die. The even sadder thing is that progressive politics aren't unpopular in the US. When Kamala was the confirmed candidate on the 5th of August, she decidedly ran on a platform of protecting the right to abortion and reproductive health care, and her own identity as a South Asian and Black American woman, which great. In fact, according to CNN's 2024 voter exit poll, about 2/3 of Americans say abortion should be legal in all or most cases. According to a Pew Research Center study, majorities of both men, 61%, and women, 64%, expressed support for legal abortion. But voters didn't necessarily tie their support of abortion to their vote for president. Nearly half of the people who say abortion should be legal in most cases supported Trump. So what happened? Was it Biden holding on to the nomination too long? Was it Kamala's staunchly pro-military, pro-imperialist sound bites? Was it just the bad campaign that focused too much on Trump and pandering to moderates and wishy-washy Republicans, rather than listening to millennials and Gen Z voters who desperately want change? In the end, I think it's a mix of all three, but what really hammered in the final nail in the coffin for me was the fact that Harris and her campaign were focusing too much on moving Republicans center and speaking too much to moderates who were already going to vote for her anyway. Data shows Republicans, especially older ones, will not change their minds, but but so much time was wasted on them, and for what? According to a Pew Research Center analysis from the 2022 midterm elections, older voters turned out more reliably in both 2018 and 2022, and continued to be largely loyal to Republican candidates. For example, among adults ages 69 and older in 2022, i.e. those who were 65 or older in 2018, 35% reported voting Republican in both elections. This compares with 28% who voted for Democrats in both elections. Another 18% of this group did not vote in either election. Republican alignment is 10 percentage points higher than Democratic alignment, 53% versus 43% among voters in their 60s. Voters ages 70 to 79 are slightly more likely to be aligned with the GOP, 51%, than the Democratic Party, 46%. About 6 in 10 voters 80 and older, 58% identify with or lean towards the GOP, while 39% associate with the Dems. And though a large portion of the American population are boomers, most of the population in the US currently is made up of Gen X, millennials, and younger. In 2021, 35.9% of the population, the largest age demographic in the US, were 18 to 44 years old, and they're more likely to lean left. When it comes to voter profiles, Pew Research Center shows about 2/3 of voters 18 to 24, 66% associate with the Democratic Party, compared with 34% who align with the GOP. There is a similarly large gap in the partisan affiliations of voters ages 25 to 29, 64% are Dems or lean that way versus 32% for Republicans. Voters in their 30s also tilt Democratic, though to a lesser extent, 55% are Democrats and 42% are Republicans or Republican leaners. Neither party has a significant edge over the other among voters in their 40s and 50s. Half of voters in their 40s associate with the Dems, and 47% are affiliated with the Republicans. The shares are reversed among voters in their 50s, 50% align with Republicans, 47% with Democrats. But instead of reaching the people who are most likely to lean left, it felt like the Dems cared more about moving people who were statistically more likely to vote right, left, which was a risky move that didn't pay off. In fact, Harris did worse numbers when it came to women and Latin Americans than either Hillary or Biden. According to CNN's 2024 exit poll, Democrats lost some support among the youngest voters, a group that overwhelmingly votes for them. But Harris also made gains among the older voters, a group that traditionally leans Republican. It's an interesting shift. Basically, she gained 1 point over Trump when it came to voters in their 30s and 40s, but Trump still won the older voters between 45 and 64, and they tied when it came to 65-year-olds and above. But when it came to the 18 to 29-year-olds, they didn't show up for her, and I get why. And sadly, her trying to rouse female voters and people who generally care about women didn't work either. Harris's edge among women this year did not exceed either Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton, a troubling sign for the vice president given that she tried to mobilize female voters on the issue of abortion. Trump maintained an edge among men. And when it came to Latino voters, Latino men broke in Trump's direction for the first time. Biden won their support by 23 points in 2020, and Trump won them in 2024 with more than 12 points. Latino women, black men, and black women still favored Harris, but by smaller margins than compared to Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden. Deciding to not cater to people who are primed to vote for you and doubling down on border control and immigration, it was just never going to work. I get wanting to mobilize older voters who are on the fence and wanting to take them away from Trump, but there are hordes of young, left-leaning voters who want to believe in more than just beating Trump and hearing about brat and coconuts and being told to shut up about a genocide. Like, how can you not see that? It's not that Americans don't want progress. In fact, looking at some of Biden's presidency and what he and his team envision for the future makes me feel like Dems actually know what people want. It's just that millions more are loyal to the Republican Party, and conservatives, young and old, they love Trump in a way that left-leaning progressives don't love Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. For us on the far left, they're simply stopgap measures who try to do stuff, but in the end aren't left-leaning enough and never will be due to corporate interest, profit, and nationalism. But for those on the right, Trump is their hero. He rallies people in such a way that Kamala could never do, since her campaign was determined on keeping things business as usual, and thus people on the left didn't really like her, and even Democrats, moderates, and centrists, and liberals were just voting for her because anyone but Trump, vote blue no matter who. What the Democrats needed this election was someone who was just as daring as Trump, but in a good progressive left-leaning way, someone who was going to condemn Israel outright, someone who was going to cancel student loan debt for good, or at least say that, and someone who wasn't pro-military and pro-border control, and unfortunately, with the Democratic Party at least, that will never happen because liberalism is based on this idea of moral superiority and reaching across the aisle to people who want to see you dead. According to CNN, Overall, roughly 3/4 of voters said they were mostly voting to support their candidate, not to oppose their rival. And I see that with Donald Trump. People vote for him in droves because they support him. Trump's campaign strategy was built around motivating low-propensity voters who don't usually take part in the political process. That paid off because there was a dramatic swing between 2020, when Biden won first-time voters, and 2024, when Trump won them. But there's important context in the fact that a smaller portion of voters reported casting their first ballot in 2024 than in 2020. Why is this? In my opinion, it's because there wasn't a mail-in ballot option this time, but also because even though I can see people voting for Harris because they like her, I also see a lot of people not voting at all because Harris isn't progressive enough, and Trump is Trump. Unsurprisingly, you can't win an election solely based on getting rid of a guy millions of people really like. Harris wasn't popular enough, even though she's undoubtedly a beautiful, well-spoken, classic politician and funny and can speak nationalistic jargon. It doesn't matter when you focus your campaign on older people who are mostly set in their ways, and when you refuse to hear younger people out who are about to cast their first vote, and just expect people to vote for you because they have to, otherwise we get Donald Trump. Before I end this section, however, I should note that it wasn't just a less than stellar campaign and Donald Trump's popularity and promise for change that ruined Harris's chances of winning. It was also blatant racism, xenophobia, and sexism. Donald Trump's own campaign used Kamala's ethnicity against her to try to discredit her Americanness, while his running mate's wife is an Indian American. He generated AI photos of Harris as a communist, a foreign evil threat, who's also an unstable woman who doesn't have biological children. At the end of the day, the US is a nation founded on bigotry. From the fact that millions of indigenous people were murdered in the founding of this country, to the founding fathers refusing to free enslaved Africans while touting liberty and justice for all, to Japanese internment camps and incarceration camps, to the America First Committee and how American eugenics inspired Hitler, to allowing the KKK to exist, and so many other stains on this nation, the US has always flirted with fascism and has never been a true democracy and wasn't intended to be. The US is an oligarchy controlled by private interests and propaganda that tells its citizens to fear anything un-American, whether that be people of color, immigrants, those of different faiths other than Christianity, women, LGBTQ plus folks, disabled people, and anyone who isn't the default straight cis het white guy. And unfortunately, a lot of people, over 70 million Americans, would rather vote for Trump and actually support Trump rather than vote for Harris, a woman of color and child of immigrants. These same people agree that Puerto Rico is a floating island of garbage, that women shouldn't have reproductive rights, that we should dismantle the Department of Education, that we should out trans kids to their parents, and ban Muslim people from entering the country. And there's again millions of these types of people. And maybe they don't agree with everything Trump says. Maybe at this point they just want any type of change, and for them he's totally a blank slate to project their own ideologies onto. But to me, it doesn't matter why you voted for Trump. The fact is you did, and a vote for Trump is a vote for evil. But I do think it's important we try to understand how common it is for people to be pro-Trump, and how pro-Trumpers are just run-of-the-mill average Americans and not just QAnon basement dwellers, because then we can begin to comprehend why people are just so pumped to vote for him, and also why these people are so disgruntled with the status quo that they'd rather vote for a fascist than a moderate. In my mind, there's a spectrum of people who vote for Trump. On the farthest end of the spectrum, there's the extremists, white nationalists, far-gone people who cannot be reasoned with, people who are outwardly bigoted and want an ethno-state, and they see Trump as their gateway to that fantasy. Then there's people who genuinely like him and believe that he's got their backs. They're not too far into the alt-right pipeline. They just think he's the best guy for the job. He's not a politician. He's an outsider. He's just like me. These people probably have Trump signs on their lawn because they see nothing wrong with him. These people are also socially and economically conservative. They want a small federal government. They might even want to do away with the Department of Education. They're not ashamed of their homophobic and transphobic views because through Trump, they feel as though their bigotry is legitimized. Next to these people are those who don't see themselves as bigots for voting for Trump, even though they might even outwardly dislike him. These types of voters are the ones who confound me the most, because on the whole, they're just your regular, average, nice people. They're even friends with people who Trump hates, but still vote for him because inwardly, they're just not as tolerant and progressive as they like to think themselves to be. Even if they're friendly, well-meaning people who you would never think would vote for a guy like Trump, They do. I see a lot of white, older female voters, and even young white female voters, college-educated women, people who I'm familiar with, vote for him every single election, and I just can't understand why. I had a close female friend in college who voted for Trump in 2016, and she was a totally unassuming white girl, very nice, very soft-spoken. We liked a lot of the same media, Avatar: The Last Airbender, but she and her family were staunchly anti-Hillary, pro-Trump, thought Trump was a good guy and best suited for the job as an outsider. Like, how are we living in the same reality? When we on the left think of Trump voters, we tend to think of QAnon basement dwellers, torch-wielding neo-Nazis, but in reality, they're our neighbors, our colleagues, our professors. I had a professor in my senior year of college, the year of Trump's first term in 2017, who was a Vietnam vet and a recovering addict, who felt deeply unappreciated by his country, loved Full Metal Jacket, we watched it in class, but who proudly voted for Trump, made a speech about how America finally got its balls back, and who openly supported Trump's Muslim ban. Like, who even are you? And he's also a social worker. This year I found out someone I've known since I was a child, a very kind and sweet older white woman, again, quiet and unassuming, voted for Trump twice. I asked my relative why they did this, and they simply shrugged and they said they've been a Republican and conservative their whole life. Nothing's gonna change that. At the core of it, we just have to face the fact that millions of white Americans, both men and women, and even non-white Americans, are deeply racist and sexist, xenophobic, and are afraid of progress and change. And sometimes I sit back and I try to understand why do quote-unquote good white people I know and have known vote for this horrible person, a convicted felon, serial harasser, draft dodger, and I come up with nothing. You can't understand hate at this level. It's illogical and nonsensical, and trying to understand evil is futile. And I think in the end, it all comes back to Hannah Arendt's 1963 book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report of the banality of evil. The people who sit back and perform evil tasks are simply unextraordinary and don't see themselves as bad people. They're just voting Republican like they always do. Evil is banal, evil is complacency. It's sitting back and watching the world burn and taking part in it because that's how the world is. The world can't change, and if it does, I need to protect my spot in it by picking the path of least resistance. The people who vote for Trump are wholly unexceptional. They hide behind party loyalty and platitudes of Trump just represents my party, not my politics, rather than confront their own bigotry because that would be too painful. The problem is that there's so many of them who see no problem with him because of how normalized he's become. Thus, they're unable to examine their own actions because if they do, they risk losing their way of life, as mostly white people who don't want equality and instead choose to cling on to white supremacy. Closer to the end of the spectrum, there's voters who think the whole thing is a joke and that voting for Trump is funny. And lastly, right-leaning centrists and moderates who will vote red no matter who, until they die, no matter who's running on the left. To conclude, I do think that trying to search for the underlying cause of evil or why people vote for Trump is futile because hate and bigotry is illogical, and you just can't reason with it. You will come up empty-handed every time you try to understand why someone could support fascism. Why would someone vote against their own interest? Why would someone hate someone based on their skin color, who they love, what gender they identify as, where they're from, what their religion is? It makes no sense. No matter how hard you try to justify racism, patriarchy, and white supremacy, there's no logic behind it, and trying to fathom it is a waste of time. I do wonder, however, if we on the left need to work harder in reaching these people who see no problem with Trump, but are also genuinely nice people, like seemingly normal. Like maybe we can't understand their reasoning, but we can try to make them see our point of view too. Would that be worth it? I really don't know at this point, but I do think we need to have some hard conversations with our community, neighbors, friends, family, friends, professors, etc., in order to ever pull these people out of the alt-right pipeline, because not talking about it and saying educate yourself isn't working. The last piece of this puzzle I want to address is nationalism and how that also pushes people to the right and makes people vote conservative. I know both Harris and Trump used U.S. nationalism and patriotism in their campaigns, but they utilized these rhetorical devices in very different ways. While Harris and Democrats in general use pride in America to look to the future and to feel hopeful and to fight for a better nation, Trump's campaign uses it as they look back to what our nation once was and how far it has supposedly fallen. Make America Great Again offers nostalgia. It makes people remember how things used to be and are supposed to be in this country, aka white men and even white women are on top, and helps make voters and supporters of him fearful of change and of anything un-American. Universal healthcare, free preschool, women's rights, that's not the American way. Americans pull themselves up by their bootstraps alone on a homestead somewhere. We march to the beat of our own drum. What is this, Europe? Many Trump supporters have this fervent nationalism that's based in the US being different and free compared to other nations. We're proud we don't have free healthcare. We're proud to not have free universities. We're proud of free market capitalism and Elon Musk. We're proud of our military and guns and how we control women's bodies and the federally mandated minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. This isn't socialist Europe or a banana republic in South America. This is America, where we can get into student lunch debt before we turn 18. And this nationalism is so strong and people are so stubbornly pro-USA, people don't see how nationalism and patriotism go against their own interests. There's this sick sort of brainwashing through US propaganda that makes millions of Americans think that the rest of the world are the weird ones and we're doing things right. We're the best country in the world because we don't use the metric system and don't have a large federal government taking care of our citizens, but rather the strongest military in the world, because that's so much better. Not everyone believes this, of course, but clearly a majority of people do and are stubbornly proud to be American, so much so that they don't want the government to help them out. The sad thing is, it's the US that's different from the rest of the world, and who has fallen so far behind. We're fighting for rights we already had, like the right to abortion, and for rights that other people around the world already have. Free universities, free hospitals, public doctors, free daycare, paid federally mandated maternity leave, free pharmacies and medication, public transportation, eggs that don't need to be refrigerated, fruit trees in public spaces. I could go on, but most American minds cannot comprehend that people in the global south, in countries like Brazil, have more rights than they do because the US is the best country in the world, right? Brazil's a banana republic, right? Every country that isn't the US is a shithole, isn't it? But because of US hegemony and nationalism and Trump's specific brand of patriotism, anything that looks vaguely progressive is deemed communist or socialist, and millions rally against that because we're proud to be American. And I just cannot understand it. The CNN 2024 exit poll says that white voters without a college degree have long represented Trump's base of support, something that has remained constant. A shift has occurred among white college-educated voters. They narrowly backed Trump in 2016, but Harris won them by about 10 points in 2024, a split driven by both men and women. Harris won white women with college degrees by about 20 points, an improvement over both Biden and Clinton. Meanwhile, Harris lost some support among voters of color, of all education levels. While Trump lost some support in rural areas in 2020, he returned to full strength there in 2024. You can try blaming blind patriotism on a lack of education, which I guess is part of it, but another big part of it is just plain old unexplainable ignorance about the rest of the world. And again, internalizing this rhetoric that we're born learning as children that the US is number one and the freest nation in the world, it's something that is drilled into our heads and it's really hard to take it out. So a lot of people, myself included, are wondering, where do we go from here? Well, first, I do want to say that the presidential election isn't the end-all be-all. Though the House and Senate and Supreme Court are both majority red, there are left politicians in power that show that people in the country want progress and support change and peace. Representatives Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar won re-election by large margins in Michigan and Minnesota respectively, despite not being allowed to be a part of the DNC. In addition, keep an eye out for your local municipal elections, state elections, and the midterm elections in 2026. I will say, however, that it's okay to wallow a bit. This is an extremely devastating time for many, especially those in marginalized communities. It's okay to take a step back and reflect and try to cope with what happened before getting back out there. Politics is exhausting and it's not helpful to doom scroll through bad news all day. Take care of yourself, surround yourself with loved ones, do something that you enjoy, and know that the fight isn't over. I don't know if it's worth changing people's minds and having those hard conversations with those who voted for Trump, but I think that it might be unavoidable and may be the only way to really get to the core of why this happened. And these talks may open the door to better educating people and undoing the damage, misinformation, and fake news that Trump has spread. So that's it for this video. Even though I expected Harris to lose, it still blows my mind how Trump won. Like, I'm still in shock. Let me know what you thought of this video and the 2024 election down below, and how you're coping with it all. I hope, as always, you stay safe and surround yourself with things and people that you love, and continue to stay strong. The fight is not over. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.